Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into a really fascinating topic, and that is the historical and modern integration of Islamic faith with secular education. Now, for a long time, there's been this perceived tension, right? A tension between religious adherence and modern fields, especially STEM. But what if mastering modern science is actually a deeply authentic religious imperative? Well, let's dive right in and find out. Think about this for a second. When divine revelation first met humanity in the cave of Hira, the very first command given to Prophet Muhammad wasn't some grand instruction to go build a vast empire. It wasn't about setting up trade routes or launching military campaigns. No, it was just a single, incredibly powerful word, Iqra, which translates to read. The source makes a really profound point here. The faith didn't begin solely with ritual. It was fundamentally launched with an act of literacy and critical inquiry.
So let's look at this idea of a false dichotomy and how we go about bridging that gap in knowledge.
You see, over the centuries, this really divisive narrative kind of took hold. On one hand, you have ilm ad-Deen, which is religious knowledge, and on the other hand, you have ilm ad-Dunya, which is worldly or secular knowledge. The source explains that over time, these just started being viewed as completely separate, competing spheres. A totally false dichotomy emerged where people actually felt like they had to choose. You're either faithful or you're modern.
But here's the thing. Orthodox Islamic thought absolutely challenges that division, entirely. As Prophet Muhammad stated, seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. And according to the source, this obligation was never just restricted to theology. In traditional Orthodox thought, all beneficial knowledge originates from one single divine source, meaning it is an absolute obligation to learn, to study, and to seek truth. Period. When you apply that perspective to modern STEM fields, it's a total paradigm shift. If all knowledge comes from one source, then to understand biology is literally to study the signs of God in nature. To master mathematics isn't just about crunching numbers on a chalkboard, it's perceiving the structural order of creation itself. By this logic, stepping into a laboratory or solving a complex equation, that is an extension of faith, not a departure from it.
Which brings us to the historical reality of all this. The actual science of faith.
Back in the Islamic Golden Age, those pioneers literally viewed scientific innovation as a direct expression of worship. In fact, if we go back to 859 CE, a woman named Fatima al-Fihri founded the University of Al-Qawiyoun, and UNESCO actually recognizes that as the oldest continually operating university in the entire world. This perfectly grounds the idea that social progress and institutional learning have been baked right into the culture for well over a millennium.
And then, of course, there's Ibn Sina. You might know him in the West as Avicenna. His monumental work, The Canon of Medicine, didn't just stay in the Middle East. It served as the standard medical textbook across Europe for over 500 years. And why was he so fiercely dedicated to his craft? Well, the source explains that Ibn Sina viewed healing the human body as a sacred responsibility. It was his faith that drove his world-changing contributions to medicine.
And it is amazing how this ancient legacy bridges directly to the disciplines we rely on today. Take al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra and algorithms. His work essentially laid the absolute groundwork for modern computer science and AI. We just talked about Ibn Sina's massive link to clinical research and surgery, and Fatima al-Fikhri's role in higher education leadership. But then, consider Ibn al-Haytham. His pioneering work in optics and the experimental method is the direct ancestor to modern physics and visual data. These scholars didn't see these fields as secular distractions. They were on the absolute bleeding edge of their time, completely driven by faith.
So, looking at all this history, it forces us to ask a pretty provocative question, and it's one the source explicitly poses. Are modern Muslims adopting foreign values when they excel in STEM fields like artificial intelligence or aerospace? Is engaging in modern science just a form of cultural assimilation? The source provides a resounding no to that. When individuals from this background excel in modern scientific and humanities fields, they are absolutely not adopting foreign values. What they're actually doing is reclaiming their own intellectual inheritance. They are quite literally picking up the baton that was passed down by people like al-Khwarizmi and Ibn Sina. Now let's talk about the 21st century imperative and why this integrated approach is a vital necessity today. The source argues that in our contemporary world, education is no longer just a pathway to getting a good job. It is a vital necessity for community dignity and self-reliance. And there are three major modern imperatives at play here. First up is socioeconomic empowerment. Societies that lag behind in STEM and critical analysis become incredibly vulnerable to economic stagnation and exploitation. Second, solving global challenges. Whether we're talking about climate adaptation in South Asia and Africa, creating medical breakthroughs, or figuring out the governance of ethical AI, the source insists that Muslim professionals need to be sitting at the decision-making tables of the world. And third, elevating societal ranks, which actually has a really deep theological backing.
And that theological backing is perfectly captured right here in Surah Al-Mujadilah. Allah will raise those who have believed among you and those who are given knowledge by degrees. The source seamlessly marries those highly pragmatic 21st century goals we were just talking about with this firm textual grounding. It shows us that seeking advanced knowledge isn't just some survival tactic for the modern world, it's a spiritually recognized achievement.
The source summarizes this dynamic so beautifully. It says, faith without knowledge breeds stagnation. But on the flip side, knowledge without moral ethics risks chaos. Modern education has to be guided by strong values. By perfectly pairing ethical grounding with cutting-edge secular education, we achieve the exact balance required for constructive, positive global citizenship.
So let's look at the call to action here and how we actually go about reclaiming this legacy.
The source makes a very direct, impassioned appeal to parents, youth, and educators tuning into this. The message is to pursue a subject like physics with the exact same reverence that you would bring to studying sacred texts. Don't let false divisions narrow your aspirations. The text actively calls on the community to go out and build schools, fund research laboratories, master technology, and excel in the humanities, and to treat all of these modern pursuits with the utmost spiritual seriousness.
The source leaves us with this continuous supplication taught in the Quran. Rabbi zidni ilma, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. It's just a beautiful synthesis of everything we've explored today. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. If the very first command was to read, and seeking all beneficial knowledge is a foundational obligation, how might our world change if we stopped dividing the sacred from the scientific? What if we instead viewed every single discovery as a step closer to understanding the divine order? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking knowledge, and I'll see you next time.